good afternoon to many of you, but good morning to many others, including my panelists, for whom this is a remarkably early start. So thank you so much for joining us. And welcome to the first panel. It's really our honor to start this conference, looking at how prompt strike capabilities contribute to a multi-domain campaign. Now, the concept of using penetrating capabilities to disrupt the functioning of an opponent is hardly new. Dewey, Svechin, Tukhachevsky, Warden all adopted this. However, the emergence of precise long-range prompt strike capabilities has accelerated the speed at which targets at operational depth can be struck. And with integration now at the forefront of contemporary Western thinking, how do prompt strike assets support multi-domain campaigns? What priority should be placed on prompt strike relative to other means of striking and disrupting targets in depth, including those that are deniable in the grey zone, for example, cyber and special operation forces? What else is needed to make the precision capability, offensive and defensive, a reality? And what priority needs to be afforded to defense and resilience against us being attacked in this way? We have an absolutely outstanding panel of thinkers to address these issues. To set the strategic context and situate precision strike within the broader range of requirements needed for its success, Lieutenant General Eric J. Wesley will speak first. He transitioned from the Army as the Deputy Commanding General of Army Futures Command, responsible for developing the future Army. He currently serves as the Executive Vice President of Flyer Defense, a leading developer of electric combat vehicles, where he's building a consortium of industry partners who will electrify, I suspect in all senses of that word, the future battlefield. He served for over 20 years in senior leadership positions, from the battalion to the Army enterprise level. He served as a strategic planner, including in the White House on the National Security Council staff, and twice as the lead planner in Afghanistan. Dr. Tom Carrico will then consider the offense-defense balance and how precision strike contributes to deterrence. He's a senior fellow with the International Security Programme and the director of the Missile Defense Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He was an American Political Science Association Congressional Fellow, working with the House Armed Services Committee and the Strategic Forces Subcommittee on US Strategic Forces Policy, Non-Proliferation and NATO. He's also a fellow with the Institute for Politics and Strategy of Carnegie Mellon University. Our third speaker will then focus on Japan and the practical implications of precision strike. Dr. Motonobu Fujita will examine Japan's vision for multi-domain operations, including defense against standoff capabilities, and talk about how it's progressing towards its policy goals. He's the Senior Policy Coordinator of the Technology Policy Office at the Acquisition, Technology and Logistics Agency, ATLA, in their Ministry of Defense. He specializes in mid to long-term planning on applied research for defense equipment and technology strategy on defense science. And he drafted the R&D vision towards realization of multi-domain defense forces and beyond. That was published by the Japanese Ministry of Defense in August 2019. I've asked each speaker to speak for approximately 8 to 10 minutes to leave time for your questions. To pose your questions, please use the Q&A facility on the right of your screen. But I think you'll agree this is an excellent panel to start this conference. And General Wesley, over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate your introduction. And to Peter, I appreciate your comment about not being there in person. Last time I was there, I think we got to enjoy what we call British pleasantries. I'm sad that we missed that this time, but it's good to be back at RUSI. As Paul indicated, I think that what I'd like to do is start by framing the problem that we're talking about here. Before we start talking about global strike, we really need to ask ourselves why, what's changed, what is the issue we're trying to solve. And there's a lot of talk about multi-domain operations and really which is driving a lot of this discussion and a lot of these investments. But we all know that with a concept, the purpose of a concept is to change an army, to orient the azimuth of the development of a future army. So what is the backdrop of multi-domain operations, and what has changed to drive this effort? Airland battle served our nations well, for the last 30, 40 years. And the question becomes, why something new? You don't need a new concept unless something has changed. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about that, because that is what is the essence of what we're talking about here. So what changed in the world that's driving this effort that we're talking about today? And I would narrow it down to 3 strategic issues and then 3 behaviors. The 3 strategic things that we think has changed is, first is you've got this revanchist Russia, which seeks to reestablish the near abroad, and now has seemingly increasing resources to at least move in that direction and demonstrated their ability to do so. The second is the revisionist China, a China that has been very open about their desire to be dominant in the 2040 time period, and indicators that they're well ahead of schedule. And then the third thing that happened is both countries watched the United States, our partners and allies, in both 1991 and 2003, and recognized the dominance that they were up against when working against a Western army such as the United States and partners and allies. So those 3 things, or revanchist Russia, revisionist China, and them watching us in 91 and 2003, has really changed some behaviors or investments that they've made. And I'll isolate it to 3. The first is that they sought asymmetric investments to counter us in all domains. And we could talk about that at length, but the second, I'll come back to that. But the second one is both countries recognize the importance of investing in multiple layers of standoff. And this investment is really what has brought up the issue of fires and why it's so important. The multiple layers of standoff they've invested in include social media, cyber attacks, but most directly as it relates to this conversation, long range, precision, massed fires. And the reason they've done that is frankly, they want no part of the Western way of war. The Western way of war, or American way of war, as I've described it in the last 30 or 40 years, is the United States, our partners and allies. We mobilize the democratic people of our countries for purpose. We mobilize forces, we move to a foreign port, we get ourselves postured, and then we initiate hostilities as appropriate on our timeline. And both countries recognize that if you give the West that opportunity, it never ends well. And therefore, they have sought to invest in a means to counter our ability to mobilize in that fashion. Now, it's important to note that that's been exacerbated by the fact that the United States has withdrawn largely from the continent of Europe, withdrawn from the peninsula in Korea, and therefore puts us in a position that doesn't have us postured well. So multiple layers of standoff is fundamental. And then the third area, which frankly has been further exacerbated by their investments in the second area, is they've leveraged the competition space. They leverage the gray zone, or active measures as it's called. And both nations have done that very well. So we are out of position and not postured well. So this poses a significant problem for the United States, and it poses a significant problem for any nation who has already spent the peace dividend that we appreciated in the 1990s. General Don Starry was the commander of TRADOC in the United States. He's also known probably as the father of air-land battle. And one of the things he said is, when a peer threat has nuclear parity with your nation, you must invest in superior conventional forces. And we have failed to do that, and therefore we have lost significant operational deterrence. So let's narrow in. I mentioned this multiple layers of standoff that both China and Russia have invested in massive quantities and massive significant improvements in technology. And so the question I would ask the group is, if the national security equilibrium were disrupted tomorrow, how would the United States or partners and allies return to the status quo? What options do we have to return to the status quo? Under our current posture, we have 2 options, frankly. If I were to be blunt, we could do nothing and adjust to the new status quo, or we would be forced to invest in a massive, protracted conflict to return to the status quo. What MDO has sought to do is add two more options or two more levels to affect the operational space, and that is to expand the competition space, which this conference is not necessarily oriented on. But the other one, the third level, would be to respond rapidly to a fait accompli attack, to be able to defeat a fait accompli attack very rapidly. The key to multi-domain operations is that number 2 and 3, expand the competition space and defeat a fait accompli attack. We can still do nothing, and we may have to invest in a protracted conflict. But it's those two new options that multi-domain operations created. As it relates to global strike, it's really number 3. It's how do you defeat a fait accompli attack very rapidly? In our work with multi-domain operations, from everything from wargaming and analytics, we could conclude that there's two simultaneous efforts that have to happen very rapidly if you want to defeat a fait accompli attack. And the first is the ability to immediately strike key nodes and key systems of their A2AD capabilities. An immediate deep strike against systems and nodes. Simultaneously, you have to immediately initiate maneuver to a position of advantage to hold key assets at risk with forward posture elements in order to force your opponent to recalculate their assessment. Now, if you have the ability to do that, strategically, they can recalculate prior to doing that, and therefore you have deterrence in effect. But the two key things is an immediate strike on key nodes and strike key systems of their A2AD network, and an immediate simultaneous maneuver to a position of advantage to hold key assets at risk. With airland battle, we focus primarily on echelons and formations. What is unique about multi-domain operations is to be able to strike key nodes and systems of their A2AD capabilities very rapidly. And as I get close to the end of my remarks here, I think there's 4 areas that we need to consider investing with respect to global strike. The first is the continuous effort to stimulate those key nodes and systems, to be able to see those key nodes and systems, and then target and strike them. So see, stimulate, and strike. And that has to be done every day by an operational headquarters. And I would ask the group, what operational headquarters in both theaters is stimulating key nodes and systems to see them in order to target and strike them every single day? The second is volume, the volume of fires in order to hit the right number of targets in the opening days of the defeat of a fait accompli attack. The third area is range, and finally speed. Chief of Staff of the United States Army has talked recently a lot about range and speed, and the ability to have the authorities and processes to respond rapidly to a fait accompli attack will enable MDO and enable the maneuver I talked about. And with that, I think I'm at 9 minutes, and I'm going to hand off to Tom, and we'll keep this thing going. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, General Wesley. I want to again thank Peter and Sid and the whole RUSI team for the opportunity to be back. You all always put on a classy event, and this really is one of my favorite conferences of the year. So I appreciate the invitation. So I'm going to, first of all, since Peter threw out the gauntlet just a few minutes ago, he says, why missiles? Let me just first take a stab at it. And since this is a London conference, I'll go to Oxford, or rather the Oxford English Dictionary. I find that few complex problems are not illuminated in some way by going and looking up the words. And the word missile comes from the root for that which is sent. And so when we think about all this diversity of missilery, offense and defense, it comes down to fundamentally a standoff problem. And there's just a whole lot of supply and demand for various aspects of standoff. That's a little simplistic, but I think it's nonetheless useful in thinking about this challenge. So let me begin by moving through the slides here, if I can get there. Apologies, a little bit of a technical problem. I'm going to pause for a second here. All right. So let me first come to, what are the, I'll also take a stab at putting a stab at the overall environment. I like to talk about it in terms of a new missile age of sorts. General Wesley referred to the Desert Storm, and I think there's also the 1999 experience and OIF. But you put all these things together, and I think you get really a surge in the global supply and demand for all of these standoff capabilities. You have a new arms control, geopolitical and technological landscape. You've got air defenses and missile defenses, and no more assured air superiority. But you're also seeing in that mix a new demand for active air and missile defense. New concepts of operations to contend with our new challenges. And of course, the prospect that this shooting things back and forth, of course, might result in new problems of escalation control and the like. And I really like the moniker that the head of the U.S. Marines, General Berger, has put to this, which is this is an emergence of a new era of missile warfare. So I apologize. I've got a technical problem here. Let me come back to this in a moment here. All right. So I'm going to stay with this. Another way of looking at what's really different about the new environment is that it's complex and integrated attack. It's not about one particular widget, one particular kind of missile, but it's really the imaginative combination of all of them. Whether it be in the Ukraine conflict from a couple of years ago, whether it be in the Obcake attack of 2019, or of course the use by the Iranians, or the demonstration rather, by the Iranians of their intent to come after our critical nodes. Think, for instance, their video from I think earlier this year of one of their missiles striking the TPY-2 radar. All this comes together, and what I would suggest is a requirement to think about the problem differently and frame it differently. This has been a missile defense conference, but we need to think about it, and I think shed some of our historical baggage and begin to think about it more as missile defeat, right? Missile defeat comprehending not merely different types of active defense, but certainly a renewed form of passive defense, but also attack operations and strike. Now let me transition to something that I think has been alluded to. It's a current controversy here in the United States, and that is the question of who is best equipped to be doing the long-range strike mission. And this is admittedly an American debate in terms of the U.S. Army as opposed to the U.S. Air Force in particular. But I think, of course, it has much wider implications, including, of course, for our Japanese allies and our other allies in the Indo-Pacific. I confess that I find the debate a bit puzzling. I find the debate a little bit unfortunate. That the challenge that we are in right now is not one that can be handled by any one service. This new missile age is going to require comprehensive fires, offense and defense, and renewed importance of offense defense across the several services. We really do to implement multi-domain operations. Well, land is one of the domains, and we need fires both going to and coming from each of the domains if we really mean to complicate the surveillance and targeting job of the bad guys. It can't be, I think, said enough that the goal of imposing multiple dilemmas is not a light one. And we make it too easy on our adversaries if we only or exclusively rely upon airborne fires, for instance. Likewise, there's a debate out there in terms of the cost of what's going on here, whether it's worth the money to have ground-based fires. So think, for instance, on the part of the United States, the long-range hypersonic weapon for longer-range stuff, but also the medium-range capability that the U.S. Army is pursuing for what they have, Tomahawk and SM-6, U.S. Marines are also pursuing something similar. But you know, the debate about the cost, I think, has not been quite honest. It's not about the theoretical cost of a gravity bomb that could be delivered to target. It's about the ability to get it there. We're not talking about Afghanistan and Iraq. Again, we no longer have assured air superiority. So we can't think about that in the same way that we thought about Desert Storm or Bosnia or Iraq. And unfortunately, I think that baggage is infecting this debate and not preventing us from thinking about the gravity of the problem that we are really facing. You know, there's also been a debate about, well, does it really make sense for especially the U.S. Army to be investing in long-range fires development when we don't have status of forces agreement or other kinds of basing agreements so that we can put things into concrete, as it were. This, I think, elides the whole point. We do not want to be putting things into concrete and advertising their locations. The ground-based fires deployments of the future, and really what's needed right now, is going to require a whole lot of mobility, and it's also going to require deception. Yes, we would not do something without the United States and its allies would not do something without consultation for each other. But in the event of conflict, those kinds of arrangements, those kinds of contingencies could be put in place far faster than the bending of metal and the system development. Those things need to be done now. We can figure out how to move them around and how to, in a flexible way, deploy them much later on. So that whole approach to business basing as usual, I think, is really unfortunate. You know, I'm old enough to remember in the last couple of years, not merely talk about multi-domain operations, but also mass. And we do have a significant mass problem. Not only will the U.S. Navy be losing up to, I think, 1,800 VLS tubes. That's a lot of missiles that go into those tubes over the course of the next decade. You know, the question of whether the bombers will be present, whether they can land and be refueled, those are not things to be taken for granted. So ground-based fires also contribute to mass by prepositioning them forward. I neglected to mention a moment ago the question of dispersal and deception. And here I think we have a potential for a tremendous shell game, rockets in boxes, numerous decoys, so as to confuse our adversaries about really where they are. And I'll just end by mentioning that the arguments out there about ground-based fires being somehow opposed to jointness, I think, is really unfortunate as well. And it's the very folks that are in charge of the joint force. Think General Hyten. It's the operators. I think the head of Indo-PACOM that are calling for ground-based fires as a key part of the overall mix. I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all for your time. Again, apologies for the technical challenges, and look forward to the conversation. And now I send it off to Fujita-san.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Could you share my slide? Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm glad to give a great opportunity to talk about our R&D vision for stand-up defense capability to support multi-domain operations. My name is Fujita Motonobu. As policy coordinator of the technology office of ATRA, I'm in charge of drafting mid to long-term planning of applied research. As for the prompt strike, which is the primary topic of this conference, there are many discussions within Japan recently. As you know, the government of Japan halted the program of deployment Aegis Assured last year. That was a trigger to start many discussions, including counter-strike capability. In my presentation, I will share our R&D vision to strengthen stand-up defense capability through comprehensive R&D of related technology. I hope you would understand JMOD's direction on standard defense capabilities through it. Next, please. And now I explain why Japan didn't focus on long-range standard missiles. What is changing? Next, please. As an introduction, I'd like to talk briefly about the characteristics of Japan. From geopolitical and security situational view, Japan consists of islands of as many as about 7,000 small islands surrounded by the sea. Japan has a long sea territory of approximately 2,000 miles north, south, east, and west. Recent years, one of our concern is military expansion and continued attempt to alter status quo by neighboring nations. As an example, this chart shows summary of PLA activities around Japan. It is believed that China aims to build up capabilities to conduct operations in more distant waters and airspace. China has rapidly expanded maritime activities in both qualitative and quantitative ways. Next, please. In addition, from social and fiscal situational perspective, in Japan, working age population is rapidly decreasing. The ratio of working age population to elderly population was 2.77 in 2010, and it is estimated to get down to 1.28 in 2060. Severe fiscal situation is another issue. Due to current fiscal situation, it is not possible to increase the defense budget rapidly. Consequently, SDF need to effectively intercept attacks against Japan while ensuring the safety of SDF personnel. Next, please. Another perspective is from historical point of view. As the same as in other countries, long-range bows were one of most commonly used weapons in the war in Japan. Also, samurais are known as for their beautiful and curved swords. In fact, long-range bows was the primary weapons of samurais. This picture shows a part of Mokoshura Ekotoba, which depicted a series of battles when Japan was invaded by other countries for the first time in the 13th century. As you see in this picture, every samurai is equipped with long-range bow. Today, standard weapons are the 21st century version of samurai's long bows. Next, please. On December 18th, 2020, the Cabinet of Japan decided to strengthen standoff defense capability. In addition, ongoing efforts according to current medium-term defense program. There are three pillars to strengthen our standoff defense capability. The first one is R&D. R&D is long-term effort until we get capabilities through the technological base. Especially, we are conducting to develop the HGVP for defense of remote islands and comprehensive R&D of related technologies. I will explain more detail in following slides. The second one is procurement. JMOD plans to procure standard missiles, which is already in international defense market. Of course, the aim of procurement is to acquire standard defense capability rapidly. We are conducting investigation for forming requirements to integrate standard missiles onto existing fighter aircraft. The third one is the upgrade of the present Type 1-2 SSM. Type 1-2 is a subsonic anti-ship missile system and now bearing the key role of eliminating enemy ships. The aim of the upgrade is extension of missile range for standard engagement, including updating target information via satellites. Type 1-2 is a ground-based missile system, but the missile itself is almost the same as its sea-based and air-launched variants. The benefit of this upgrade is expected to be acquired domestic standard missiles, which can mount it on existing launch platform with minimum engineering efforts and costs. Now, let's see the R&D division on standard defense. Next, please. In this section, I will explain our R&D division on standard defense briefly. Next, please. In order to explain our challenges to support multi-domain operations, I'd like to share with you our R&D division itself, which we published in 2019. The R&D division is a document which presents technological challenges and roadmaps regarding technologies required to Japan's future defense capability. Although it is not a fixed budget plan, it shows the midterm perspective of R&D investment for future readiness. As the themes of R&D division, we picked up EMS, ISR, and cyber defense for new domains, and underwater warfare and standard defense for traditional domains. So let's move on R&D division on standard defense. Next, please. Because the R&D division is a communication tool with many stakeholders, including defense industry. So we thought the key question, the first key question is, what is different from our past R&D experience? In general, new missiles development of new missiles take a long time. Therefore, we focused on hypersonic missiles as the R&D effort for standoff weapons. We identified 6 steps to demonstrate standoff capability and 4 groups technologies here. Next, please. Here is our technical challenges for standoff defense capability. Next, please. Next, please. And this is R&D roadmaps for standoff capability. Because acquisition of standard missiles and development long-range subsonic and supersonic ship missiles are expected to be completed until late 2020s. So Atlas has already started several applied research so that we can integrate mature technologies for the future deployment of hypersonics in 2030s. Next, please. This is a future notional picture of our R&D division. So next, please. Next, please. Now I'd like to briefly show our progress. This is the portfolio of our standard missiles. The vertical axis shows the range and shows altitude, and horizontal axis shows range. Our R&D efforts are mainly hypersonic cruise missiles and hypervelocity gliding projectiles. Next, please. To the beginning, last year, we started to conduct mission-level simulations to find gaps and key parameters to build line-of-sight tail chains to support forming technical requirements for future hypersonic missile systems. Next, please. And we started to apply research on scramjet engine in 2015. Next, please. And here is our recent progress of our research. And next one is our GGP concept. And next, please. And this is her conclusion in brief. Our R&D vision stands for our effort for hypersonics. Thank you for your kind attention.